Welcome back to Session 0, where I discuss Dungeon World and other RPG topics. Today I continue my Monster Talk series. Stay a while and listen while I talk about the Otyugh. Before I get started, I want to say thank you to my subscriber Adam Lures for requesting the Otyugh for a Monster Talk. I'd created an Otyugh for the very first issue of my Session 0 zine years ago, but it was really just to play on the old lady's speech to the soon-to-be queen in The Princess Bride. For this Otyugh, I wanted to take a very deliberate look at the monster and Dungeon World to see how much mileage I could get out of it. So let's jump into modifications. Alright, so here's the Otyugh on page 238 of the Dungeon World rulebook. I like some bits and will discard others as I normally do. I'm fine with 20 HP and 1 armor, but I've changed the primary weapon to Bite, which I realize is an action rather than a weapon, but Razor Maw wouldn't fit. It wouldn't fit because I changed the damage to D8 plus 3, which is a 5e conversion of damage, with the close, messy, and 1 piercing tags. I agree with the solitary tag, as do all of my source books, although 2 of them suggested pairs and clusters as well, which I think is just too many. The large tag is something else all the sources agree about. I also included the intelligent tag for a short time, but removed it soon after. D&D 3.5 allowed the Otyugh to speak Common, and Pathfinder mentioned that they were surprisingly intelligent in seeking out symbiotic relationships. I don't really agree with that, and I'll talk about why when I get to Instinct. For special qualities, I shortened Filth Fever to Filth and added Minor Telepathy. This Minor Telepathy came out of the 5e Monster Manual, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I'll talk a little bit more about it when I get to the useful information, and again when I get to mechanics. I want to talk just a second about why I break my monster descriptions down into 2 sections, interesting and useful. The obvious reason is so that when a character uses spout lore about the monster, you have a built-in way to reply with the correct level of information. But also, it allows me to strongly reinforce narrative and mechanical use in a really synergistic way. Some of the monster descriptions in Dungeon World don't really do this and are just silly or bizarre. In my opinion, these descriptions need to tell you how to play the monster. They need to be guides to the fictions and mechanics just as much as the special qualities, instinct, and moves do. So let's take a look at my interesting lore. This foul-smelling, tentacled beast with a maw full of razor-sharp teeth and eyes on a long, thin stalk lives under and around the refuse of civilization, happily eating anything or anyone that gets discarded. All of this either reinforces or will be reinforced by other aspects of the monster. While often found in sewers, these 3-legged scavengers will stalk any foul place which promises a steady diet of garbage and flesh, rotting or wriggling. This tells players where they'll probably find an Otyugh, but leaves room for them to show up in other places as well. It also says they're 3-legged stalkers, so they're not sedentary, although I'll come back to that later, and that they'll basically eat anything, including dead or living people. For useful, I gave it, while it's best to avoid the Otyugh, which isn't difficult due to its strong foul stench, attacking at range and keeping out of reach of its tentacles is key to victory. It lets the character sniff out an Otyugh, literally, by giving you as the Game Master a way to show signs of an approaching threat. It also gives them a strategy to use against the Otyugh, while giving you something to think about with regards to location and scenario design. It doesn't know how to turn their move back on them, but you can prep and exploit ways to do so, and I'll talk about them a little later. I said I'd mention how this useful information relates to the minor telepathy, but I'm not going to just yet. It speaks to the synergy I spoke of earlier though, so I just wanted you to remember that I said it. For Instinct, I really don't care for the original one to be foul. An Otyugh just wants to eat, and that's backed up by some 5e Monster Manual lore. It has a lack of concern for anything but food. I also don't agree with 3.5 giving it the common language, and Pathfinder saying it's surprisingly intelligent. I do think that it instinctually understands that a higher population density equates to more food, so I've given mine to devour civilization's refuse. This is reinforced by the interesting lore and says, without explicitly saying, that they hang around where people make their homes, whether they're humans, goblins, orcs, whatever. Finally, let's get to moves. I'll only read them off for now and discuss them in the next section. Grab or swat with tentacles, and I gave it Forceful for funsies. Belch Foulness, which I still can't say without laughing, but is really good. And Lure or Frighten someone telepathically, which will be super important. That's it for modifications, and with that in mind, I'm going to swap the order I typically employ in these videos. From now on, mechanics will follow modifications, and narrative will come at the end. I'll start with Defy Danger because between the tentacles, filth, and telepathy, all of these moves are written with Defy Danger in mind. As I said in the first video in this series, Defy Danger is an incredibly easy way to use the tell them the requirements or consequences and ask GM move. Anytime a character moves, you can have them defy danger because the tentacle might grab them, swat them away, or swat something at them. This can also deal damage. It can separate them and use up their resources. This could also represent an Otyugh attacking at range, which is one of the forms of turn their move back on them. It's using a tactic that the characters might employ, but I'll touch on that one again a bit later. Belch Foulness may be my favorite move. I got the idea from the 4th edition monster manual, which gave the Otyugh a stench aura. It made me think of Malboros from the Final Fantasy series. They exude this cloud of toxic foulness that causes all kinds of negative side effects. In Dungeon World, this could be any number of effects, including poison, sleep, and even debilities. The Otyugh can employ this toxic belch offensively or defensively, producing a greenish haze which fouls the air. Attempting to act within it can cause a character to defy danger in order to avoid becoming poisoned, falling asleep, or even just stopping to vomit, which gives the creature a chance for a bite attack. If they fail, you can hit them with a lingering effect. But none of this matters as long as the characters keep their distance and attack from range, right? Well, that's where minor telepathy and the lure move come in. While they're still a fair distance away, hit them with, each of you are overcome with a sudden intense thought. You know there's treasure down there, and lots of it. Or something like, you all hear a faint sob. It grows louder and becomes a pained growl. Then a guttural desperate cry. Help me, please, I'm down here. What do you do? Of course you can get really creative with this, especially when you know your players. If they move in that direction, you can ratchet up the stink factor to show signs of an approaching threat. The stench grows stronger with every step you take down the sewer tunnel. If the party has already gotten lore about an Otyugh and think it's wiser to turn around, have them defy danger to shake off the lure. If they do shake it off, or when they reach the Otyugh, the telepathy stops, instantly. Now you can reveal the unwelcome truth that it was all in their head. While this is technically using a monster move, you're also offering an opportunity to find treasure or save someone, so have some good loot available if they engage and destroy the monster. The telepathy move also has a second part, which is to frighten someone. This is a defensive measure if things turn against the Otyugh. It can shotgun blast the idea that they should run for their lives. The useful lore also presents the perfect way to give an opportunity that fits some classes' abilities, those which can attack at range, and show a downside to other classes, races, or equipment, those which cannot attack at range. I also like the downside idea of the Otyugh targeting dwarves and halflings first, because it is learned that they run slower on their shorter legs. The other side of turn their move back on them, negating ranged attacks, can easily be accomplished by setting the encounter in a space small enough that ranged attacking is difficult or not feasible. Finally, put someone in a spot or give them a hard choice can be very intense. Make it grab people or things the characters care about, and make them choose which one they care about more. Okay, now that I've covered my modifications and mechanics, let's take a look at narrative uses. There are several more ways to use the Otyugh than I had considered before researching this video, and I want to talk about two broad archetypes which can exist regardless of location. I call them archetypes, although mode may be more appropriate, and I'll discuss why shortly. The first archetype is Sedentary Receiver. This is a Sarlacc, or Watcher in the Water, which has become so fat that it actually depends on others to feed it. The second is Stalking Scavenger. It goes forth to find food from its surroundings, and surroundings are civilization, or to put it in a smaller scale term, a settlement, be that a village, metropolis, dungeon, etc. Earlier I said mode may be more appropriate than archetype, because a sedentary receiver may become a stalking scavenger if it loses weight because it's not getting fed enough, and a stalking scavenger may become a sedentary receiver if it layers near a settlement which keeps it fed. That's just something else you need to consider. So, knowing from its interesting lore and instinct that civilization is an important factor, and downsizing the concept of civilization to the more easily understood settlement, we can further break down settlement to mean two things. People or creatures living in a specific space. This is really the key to memorable use of the Otyugh in my opinion, because it's not just about where the creature is encountered. I think who it lives near is just as important. Not more important, because you'll need to consider both. As the GM, you may get to choose where and who, but in my experience, and because it's the character's story, not yours, your players will typically give you one piece of that puzzle. We're in the capital city, for example, or we're going to pursue those orcs to rescue the townfolk, and you will fill in the other piece. So let's talk scenarios, and I'll start with that first example, we're in the capital city. Large cities definitely have sewers, which is kind of a default setting, along with swamps. It's tempting to just say people are the who, but people don't typically live in sewers. Maybe goblins live in your sewers. I like using rat folk, which I model after the Skaven from Warhammer Fantasy. There are myriad reasons a player character may end up in a sewer-based goblin or rat folk settlement. But a city offers more than just sewers. There are butchers, tanners, and any number of other professions which might create a large-scale waste. Otyugh as garbage disposal is viable even down to the village-sized settlement, but don't forget the rotten stench it exudes and the possibility of it turning against the settlement if it doesn't get fed enough. Cities also have graveyards, and I hadn't even considered this until I read it in the 5e Monster Manual. An idea that springs to mind is a mystery which appears to be grave diggers, but turns out to be an Otyugh pulling up coffins and eating them whole. Big cities might also have an arena from which dead gladiators are fed to the Otyugh, and they could also have a breakout of some disease for which proper disposal of the dead may be incredibly important. Also from the 5e Monster Manual is the idea of an Otyugh buried in a manure-filled animal pen. The pigs aren't getting fatter because the Otyugh is eating the food put out for them. Then 1 or 2 pigs go missing every night. Then one morning the farmer doesn't come back from feeding the pigs, and now his wife has sent a message to the village asking for help. Swamps are also considered a sort of default setting for an Otyugh, although Dungeon World lists them as cabin dwellers. Think about who might live in a swamp. Frogfolk, kobolds, lizardfolk, and sahuagin all are listed as swamp denizens, and so is the basilisk, by the way, if that gives you some ideas. Put some thought into the relationship between a settlement of these and an Otyugh. For example, lizardfolk in D&D are described as super pragmatic, using every portion of a kill for food and crafting, and even considering their recently deceased as a food source. This means they won't create much if any waste. So either an Otyugh won't lair near them, or it will but then stalks them directly because they don't keep it fed. How would frogfolk, kobolds, and sahuagin interact with them? Finally, going back to my second example of pursuing the orcs, I can imagine an orc settlement which captures people from villages, caravans, logging camps, etc. solely for ransom of food and needed materials. If people don't pay to get their folks back, the captives get fed to the Otyugh. I can make only a few small changes to the Ice Shield Orcs danger from my last video to create the Rotreek Orcs. Here's a land card for the orc settlement, and a customization of the basic orc from the 5e Monster Manual as well. Alright, that's it for the Otyugh. What did I miss? Tell me in the comments below how you'd use this creature. I want to say thanks again to Adam Lures for requesting this monster. If anyone else has a Monster Talk request, please let me know in the comments. You know what to do if you appreciate my content. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.